Senator Elizabeth Warren was campaigning over the weekend in New Hampshire.
I have called on the House to initiate impeachment proceedings.
That was her campaign announcement, if you will, one of the things that she had said over the weekend. We heard from, I mentioned before that E.J. Dionne had a piece in the Washington Post today saying those demanding impeachment are right to say Mueller's report can't be just filed away and ignored. Being tough and determined is not enough. The House also needs to be sober and responsible, making the case that there are very few people who are persuadable, so they need caution, and saying the uncommitted now need to see the full horror of what Mueller revealed about this president. A resolute but deliberate approach is more likely to persuade them. All right, let's bring in Dr. William Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University. He's the co-author of News Verdicts, The Debates and Presidential Campaigns. He joins us, as he often does, and tweets at Dr. B. Rosenberg. Bill, welcome. Thanks for being here today.
Good morning.
How do the Democrats move forward on this? Your take on that?
Well, I think it's a very tricky path that they have to navigate. There's basically, as I see it, three paths. One is that they could essentially just move on and accept the behavior of Trump and let him continue to assert that he had no collusion and no obstruction. They might decide to hold hearings and press for greater clarity and public awareness. It's unlikely that the general public is going to sit, as many of us have done, and read the pages of the Mueller Report with its redactions, or they can move on for a call for impeachment hearings. But each one of those brings with it certain problems, okay? Doing nothing seems impossible. It's like not telling your child that they've done something wrong even though they haven't broken the law. You still need to sort of educate them and to provide whatever appropriate punishment or redress is necessary. So the Democrats are not going to do that. Path two, to move on and call for impeachment, is problematic because if they call for impeachment, they're likely to get the House to vote for impeachment, but very unlikely to get the Senate to do so. Virtually none of the senators have budged. The only one that's really sort of publicly come out in any way is Mitt Romney. And that would just embolden Trump to continue to assert that there was no collusion, no corruption, and now the Senate has vindicated him. But holding hearings and getting greater clarity is probably the wisest move for the Democrats, because essentially what they can do is they can bring all of the people that have been laid out before them in the Mueller Report in for public testimony. I mean, think about the impact of having people like Mueller and then Barr, and then going back in the administration, just to go back to people who have long since left, but left because they couldn't control Donald Trump and keep him within the guardrails. And I think that's going to make a big difference in terms of the general electoral mood going towards 2020. Maybe not to impeach the president, but to continue to show the American public what his administration and what his campaign was all about.
I guess one of the challenges I see ahead, if they decide, for example, to hold hearings and bring in Robert Mueller, William Barr will have to appear from time to time anyway because of traditional oversight by the House and Senate committees that are appropriate to the Justice Department. But I wonder, what does that do to persuade anybody? In other words, the sense was over these last 2 years that something was coming from Robert Mueller, that whatever it was, not even a smoking gun, it just never really materialized. And now you're setting up expectations, not you personally, Bill, but the Congress would be setting up expectations for something substantive that would say, okay, now we understand, and here we go. And if that doesn't appear, then I guess the Democrats have a backup position to say, well, you know, we've now had enough conversations with Robert Mueller and William Barr to realize we don't have enough to move forward with on impeachment, and then they just back off on it then.
Well, I have a minor quibble with you, Tim. I think the issue is that part of what's transpired recently is the confusion that has been lingering out there for quite a while about that Office of Legal Counsel memo from 1973 that says basically a sitting president cannot be indicted. I think a lot of the American public thought that Robert Mueller was going to come forward with a series of indictments and charges of crimes that were going to be dealt with by the courts. And that simply was never going to happen.
So why didn't anybody say that in the beginning?
That would have been helpful and probably would have been more impactful, because then the expectation about what the Mueller report was going to be would be very different. But what the Mueller report has done is it's sort of gathered all the information, laid it out, and provided Congress with a roadmap if it decides to go the impeachment route. The impeachment route, though, I think, given the polarization in the United States today, is probably not a very plausible one. We have today, in fact, Nancy Pelosi holding a big meeting in Washington to discuss how to move forward. She's already publicly said that she doesn't favor impeachment unless there's really clear evidence that crimes were committed and that there was bipartisan support. Since we don't have either one at this time, the option of holding hearings, while it won't change the process necessarily in terms of impeachment, will do a couple of things. First of all, if you look carefully at the report itself, the first portion is the most heavily redacted portion, and that had to do with Russian meddling in the election. And while much of that may not be able to be publicly released because of security issues, we have an opportunity to understand that Donald Trump's administration has done very little, if anything, to prepare us to not get hacked again in 2020. So that's going to bring attention to a public, which I'm going to assert is mostly in the middle, the independents, the people that are not committed to Donald Trump but aren't necessarily on board with the Democrats. And I think that battle over the stake of voters who are very small in terms of potentially swinging could make a major difference in the 2020 election.
By the way, one of the points you made in our very beginning of our conversation, Bill, was one I was thinking the other day. I was watching one of the morning news programs saying that, America is digesting today the Mueller report. And I was thinking, nobody in America is digesting the Mueller report on Good Friday. I mean, I understand that people care and the people who listen to this show and political shows. But by and large, the 260 million adult possible voters out there, I don't think are that focused on what was in the Mueller report. I mean, I may be wrong about that, but you deal with public opinion all the time.
I think you have a strong point here. I think if you looked at the trend line on public opinion about the Mueller report, people were getting tired of the investigation, not because they didn't think that things weren't forthcoming, but because they just wanted to sort of move on. They didn't see necessarily a change that was going to happen in terms of removing the president from the White House. I think the Democrats have to couch their next year and a half in line with what can be done to preserve democracy in America, what can be done to put on hold some of the things that we're facing today, including perhaps a revisit of that Office of Legal Counsel memo. Maybe it's time that should be changed. But at the same time, if we go back to the Nixon example, Nixon, when he was facing his troubles, got the vice president at the time to give him a pardon, partly because the pardon was going to remove the burden of having a major trial in the Senate, but also was going to remove the possibility that Richard Nixon could be convicted of crimes after he left office. The Mueller report has laid out a lot of information that might be used in a criminal investigation going forward when the president is no longer the sitting president. So that's a great fear, I would imagine, of Donald Trump. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know whether or not he can grant a pardon to himself over any of these actions. He might be able to do that, but just think about the stir that would raise. So the line that the Democrats have to move forward on, as well as Republicans, particularly Republican senators who are up for re-election. There are 34 seats that are up for re-election in 2020, and most of them are held by Republicans. Getting Republicans to have to in some way come out of the shadows and take public positions about what's transpiring might be a very good bulwark for Democrats who want to run against them. So there are a number of different tiers of how this could play out, but we have to recognize that the likelihood of impeachment, particularly with so few months left, is probably small, but the chance of Democrats to upset the Trump campaign in 2020 looms very large.
Dr. William Rosenberg, Bill, thanks for being here.
Have a great day.
You too, Dr. William Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University. Thoughts on the Mueller Report, political ramifications, because that's what we deal with is politics. He is tweeting at Dr. B. Rosenberg, Rosenberg.